Welcome everybody to this and a series of Global Health Leader interviews for CUGH 2021. I'm Dr. Keith Martin, the Executive Director of the Consortium of Universities for Global Health. Regardless of where you live, whatever country you live in, every country faces both domestic and international challenges. We're seeing this regardless of whether it's the pandemic, climate change, biodiversity losses, conflict, corruption, nationalism. These forces are weakening the multilateral systems we have had since World War II, but also domestically within countries. What do we make of this broken system? Well, today I'm very pleased to have an expert. Dr. Richard Haass is the 18th president of the Council on Foreign Relations based in New York City. He is an author, diplomat, and an individual who leads CFR, which is a think tank and an educational institution. He's written 15 books or edited 15 books, and his latest book, The World, A Brief Introduction, is an excellent tome that helps to make sense of the complex world around us. Dr. Haass, welcome, and thank you very much for being here today with us.
Thank you for having me.
The first thing I have to ask Dr. Haass is having served at the highest levels of the US government and the White House, can you share with us what were the characteristics of the environment that you found most effective in being able to address the multilateral challenges that face any White House?
Look, it starts with personnel. Some has pointed out along the way that personnel is policy, so you want people who are experienced, knowledgeable, there because they ought to be there rather than because simply of personal or political connections. You then really want to have a formal process. You need a formal process for assessing issues, options. You want to have a process that then allows for decisions, and then you also need follow-up. Implementation, we used to teach at the Kennedy School, is often 90% of life. So, the more formal the system, in my experience, the better. It decreases the chance of policies being introduced that have not been properly vetted. It increases the chances or the odds that there actually is a relationship between what you think you've decided and what it is you actually do. It it decreases the chances you'll be surprised because everyone's participated who ought to participate. So again, I think there's a strong argument for setting up a formal decision-making process to again review options and to make decisions and oversee implementation. Not just in the White House, but essentially in an administration.
And that competence at a public administrative level is critical for any country to be able to, as you mentioned, implement the solutions that citizens are requiring. But you've spoken and written extensively about the transnational threats we're facing. But in the face of that, we're also seeing a rise in nationalism and politicians using nationalism to drive short-term political gains. But a consequence, there are costs to that, significant costs, and it really weakens our ability to deal with those transnational threats. What do countries need to do? What do we need to do to be able to strengthen the multilateral institutions that are vital to addressing these challenges that know no borders?
Look, you're right that we're seeing a resurgence of nationalism, but the beginning of reality is an understanding that no country can wall itself off from the forces that are defining today's global era. So you can be as nationalist as you want to be, but that doesn't give you safety. It doesn't give you immunity from the things that come across borders, whether it's greenhouse gases, whether it's computer viruses, whether it's infectious viruses. It may not protect you from missiles. It may not protect you from warheads. It won't protect you from flows of capital in many cases. So again, nationalism is in many cases better as a slogan than it is as a reality. I do think multilateralism makes a great deal of sense. There's nothing any country can do better on its own than do with others. And I think the most interesting conversation in foreign policy and international relations is not whether to approach issues multilaterally, but it's both the form of the multilateralism and the content. One should never equate or assume that multilateralism looks like the United Nations, much less the UN General Assembly. Rather, effective multilateralism tends to be much more tailored, much more boutique style. And then you obviously have to think about what's the content. What are the arrangements? What's you're trying to bring about? What is the machinery you're trying to invent in order to buttress certain rules or certain behaviors internationally? And that again is that's the serious conversation.
And using those boutique multilateral efforts, let's take the pandemic right now and vaccine nationalism that is really crippling the ability of many countries in the world, particularly low-income countries, to access vaccines. How do leaders, when they've used nationalism to drive their own political gains, how do they then do an about face and say to their citizens, we need to invest in actually providing and helping other countries get access to this vaccine that is critically important to protecting all of us?
Look, you raise a good question. It's not easy because it's counterintuitive. The instinct is that countries should help themselves first. I understand that. The model that comes to mind is in the old days when we used to get on airplanes. One of the first things you'd hear when you get on an airplane is this disembodied recording telling you that there could be loss of cabin pressure. If there is, oxygen masks will drop down, and you should take the mask and help yourself before you help your neighbor, the person sitting next to you. And that's essentially the approach most countries have taken with vaccine. The problem is the analogy breaks down. What we're seeing is this sequential approach is not just bad for those parts of the world that are in a position to produce their own vaccines, but it's also bad for the countries that are producing the vaccines, because what is happening is, as you know, mutations are appearing. And then of globalizations, mutations are being introduced into these countries that have the vaccines. And the problem is some of these mutations will not be blocked by the vaccine. So what we need to do is almost overcome the intuitive approach, which is what I would call sequentialism. And what we ought to think about is an approach that's simultaneous. We ought to take care of ourselves and at the same time take care of others, not as an act of philanthropy, for the record, not that I'm against philanthropy, but out of an act of enlightened self-interest. But in order to sell that, that will take a leader explaining. It will take a leader getting up there and saying, here's why it is in our self-interest to do it. Obviously, he or she will be much better positioned to make that argument if they are producing and distributing a significant amount of vaccine. For example, it would be much easier for President Biden to do this if the United States, say, can continue to produce vaccine and have enough distribution in place that you could give 2 million doses a day. Unfortunately, we have thus far adopted what I would call the sequential approach, but I'm hoping at some point that gets revisited. Again, it will be better for the rest of the world, which in turn would be better for us.
And part of we can produce the vaccines, but of course you have to vaccinate to be able to make sure that they're effective. And I've been struck by the disinformation bubbles that too many people live in. And I know you wrote the book, A World, A Brief Introduction, as part of multiple efforts on your part to be able to puncture that disinformation bubble. How do leaders, I've traveled many places in the United States and heard these narratives that really run counter to the kind of evidence and facts that you've just been describing. What do we need to do to be able to puncture those disinformation bubbles that are really preventing people from adopting, advancing, and supporting those initiatives that would actually help them, not only the country?
Sure. I'd say two things. One is you've got to find community leaders, people who others look up to, who will go out and say, look, I've taken the vaccine, I'm taking it, be photographed taking it. And I think that will hopefully set a model for behavior. Could be athletes, it could be people in the arts, it could be community leaders. And we obviously in particular need this in minority communities, which are being hurt by this much more. So one thing is to identify and see if you can recruit people who are looked up to in specific communities. I'd also say religious leaders. One thing a lot of Americans, for example, do is they go to church and mosques and synagogues every week. Well, if we can get religious leaders to make a concerted effort here, I think it could make a real difference. The other thing is over time, if people see that those who have taken the vaccine have done well, that they're physically healthy, they're able to go back to work, they're able to enjoy life a little bit more, I think this is a problem that could begin to take care of itself. I think if this happens, the anti-vaxxers will increasingly lose ground.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely spot on. If we can actually showcase visuals and tell the stories of those people, those leaders who are respected in those communities to do this, that will go a long way to hopefully increasing the uptake of the vaccines. I want to shift to a second to the larger, some of the vexing global challenges that the United States faces, and one is Russia. We saw the significant cyber attack that took place a couple of months ago, a huge assault on this country that perhaps didn't get the attention that it should. How does the United States and its allies actually deal with a Russia that has been attacking this country and other countries through undermining governance, creating instability internally, actually capitalizing on divisions within countries for their own end? What do we do with Russia?
One is I'm careful about the use of the word attack at the risk of getting a little bit wonky here. If what the Russians did was penetrated a lot of our systems in order to steal information, that's espionage. And technologies have changed, but that I would not describe as an attack. What would be an attack is if they inserted malware that would operate now or potentially could be turned on down the road. That would be an attack. What they're doing in terms of trying to interfere with American democracy, that is a form of an attack. So I think we need to disaggregate things that they're doing, but obviously we want to make our systems much less vulnerable. I think invulnerable is too high of a bar, but we can make things more vulnerable by the physical nature of the system, as well as certain behaviors that we encourage or discourage. We obviously have to look at regulation of the internet if we're worried about that. We have to look at things like civics education, so people will be in a position to discern or distinguish between facts and things that purport to be facts but are anything but. We're also going to have to look at how we push back against Russia through sanctions or cyber behavior or other methods in order to get them to think twice before they go on the offensive against us. So it seems to me there's no single solution, and may not even be a solution, but there may be a range of efforts both to decrease our vulnerability and to potentially influence Russian behavior.
And perhaps a larger, even more complex challenge is China, and how the West, and particularly the United States, can have a more effective relationship with China, given what's happening with the Uyghurs and a number of other actions the Chinese government has deployed. If you were, I mean, maybe you are advising the Biden administration, or what should the international community or the American public know about how to move forward with having a more productive, effective relationship with China without ignoring the human rights values that we support?
Look, it's not going to be simple for exactly the reasons you suggest. It's not a one-directional or one-dimensional relationship. There's obvious things that are going on inside China, the treatment of the terrible treatment of the Uyghurs, the violation of law and commitments in Hong Kong, Chinese theft of intellectual property in the economic domain, their very muscular foreign policy in the South China Sea and elsewhere. So there's lots of things that, for good reason, give us real pause. And the challenge from the U.S. point of view is how do we push back against China where we must? We'd like to do it, though, in a way that does not lead to confrontation. And second of all, we'd like to do it in a way that does not preclude cooperation, say on North Korea or on climate change or on global health, where such cooperation would be in our collective self-interest. This places a real premium on diplomacy and on statecraft. That obviously takes two to tango. So one of the is whether China is prepared to restrain what it is it does in pursuit of its own objectives. But the stakes here are enormous. This will be the defining relationship of this era of history. And I'd say one other thing, it's not only what we do vis-a-vis China, it's what we do vis-a-vis ourselves. China can be blamed for good reason for how it handled the initial weeks and months of what became a pandemic, but China cannot be blamed for the bulk of our inept response to the break of COVID-19 here. China wasn't responsible for our shortage of equipment, for our unwillingness to wear masks, and the like. That was on us. China is not responsible for the fact that we're not farther advanced in offering broadband, or that our infrastructure in many cases are so poor, that our immigration system makes little sense, or our public schools aren't better. So a big part of our policy towards China is really a policy about ourselves. It's American competitiveness and all the things we need to do in order to impress China that a policy of adversarial with the United States is not something they can ever win.
And shining that lens on, and it's a great point. Looking at there are things that need to be fixed here, and this may be a question that might be too difficult to answer or no, but big money has actually poisoned the body politic in the United States, I would argue, and the Citizens United decision was really harmful to the ability of legislators to be able to, as you mentioned, utilize the evidence-based solutions to advance public policies that benefit a larger population in the United States, hence the challenges that you've just shone a light on. Is Citizens United a dead issue? Can it be changed? Is there a way forward to get big money out of politics and liberate legislators?
I am extremely skeptical. Supreme Court essentially equated the spending of money with free speech. So I don't think that's probably going to work. I think the real question is, where are there areas for regulation and things like social media, conventional media? Can we strengthen what used to be called things like fairness doctrines and the like? And in some cases, you may just have to compete. You won't be able to stop certain sides from engaging in the political process. You may simply balance them. There's also a possibility, I think, of greater transparency, so we know exactly who is doing certain things, which may affect the way that it is understood. But I don't see, an easy or likely path for significantly reducing the role of money in the public marketplace.
Yeah, that's actually unfortunate. I always think that if you can get money out of the political system to a larger degree, you'll liberate legislators to be able to represent their constituents more effectively. And you've moved the Council of Foreign Relations very far into the education space. You're very passionate about using education to be able to create an informed electorate. What are your aspirations, Dr. Haass, for that movement? Can you describe a little bit about some of those initiatives and what you hope to achieve through them?
Sure. I mean, Council on Foreign Relations, we're actually celebrating our 100th year this year. For our first 85 or 90 years, we mostly focused on a small number of people in and out of government who were part of the foreign policy debate in this country. And over the last 10 or 15 years, we really widened the aperture, and we said, we're going to, while we continue to do that, to focus on people who are dedicated professionally to being participants in this debate, we also want to reach a much larger swath of the American public. In particular, students at the high school and college level, and then their teachers and professors. Also, I mentioned before, people who go to religious leaders. We want to reach journalists around the country. And what we're trying to do is make people more globally literate. The argument is that in order to be an informed citizen, you've got to know the basics, the traditions, the laws, the values about American politics, from the Constitution to the federal system, to checks and balances. Essentially, as you said, you want people to be informed citizens, informed voters. But also in this day and age, in the 21st century, you've also got to be literate and informed about the world. Think about it. What began in Wuhan didn't stay in Wuhan. Here we are living with, and in some cases, unfortunately, dying from the results of a global pandemic. Climate change. It comes from everywhere. It affects everywhere. We're getting close to the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Terrorists trained in Afghanistan come here and kill 3,000 people in a day. And what all these things have in common is that what goes on, quote unquote, out there finds its way here, and it fundamentally affects our lives. So our starting point is that in order to be an informed citizen, you've not only got to know about your own country, but you've got to know about the world. These are the two sides of the civics coin, if you will. And what we're increasingly doing, particularly online, is doing our best to augment the materials out there that can be used in and out of classrooms to teach students, again, at the high school and college level, but also Americans of any age, to help make them globally literate so they can better reach their own opinions about what's going on in the world, about how to hold their elected representatives to account. So we've made this for us, a major initiative. And we've got these like World 101 and Model Diplomacy, which again are meant to be resources for Americans in and out of classrooms. So essentially they are much better positioned and prepared for this world where, like it or not, again, what goes on out there is going to fundamentally affect what happens here.
And people around the world can get access to this. Your foreign affairs journal is superb. As I said, I've read it for decades. Academic institutions around the world can access CFR products. Is that correct?
Not just academic institutions. If you go online, go to CFR.org, everything I've just talked about is available for free and online. And if you go foreignaffairs.com, there's all sorts of content every day, as well as every 2 months in our magazine. That's got a rather modest subscription cost. But look, our whole DNA as an institution is to be a resource for citizens in this and other countries. So we make available an enormous amount of material, some at a basic, if you will, educational level, some at a more advanced level. Most of the meetings we do, the transcripts and the videos are on the record. We have 3 regular podcast series now. And again, a lot of our work is designed to be what you might call backgrounders or explainers, to give people foundations. So then when you get bombarded by the daily news flow, you're much better positioned to make sense of it.
So finally, my last question, Dr. Haass, is we have a network of 30,000 people around the world within the Consortium of Universities for Global Health. Many of them, like you, are trying to find ways to mend a broken world. What are your final closing comments to a global audience who would be allies in the work that you're doing, trying to make a world a better place, not to be maudlin about it, but that's exactly what we do?
But let me sort of focus on the health space. I think we've got to, again, understand that what happens anywhere potentially affects everywhere, and that goes in both directions. So again, here we are living with infectious disease that began in China and spread around the world, and we're producing vaccines in the United States, countries which will then travel around the world themselves in a way of dealing with. And this, to me, is globalization. So one is to the machinery, because the machinery right now is to some extent inadequate. The World Health machinery is not up to the challenge, I would argue, in the infectious space. And policies of many countries are not in any way close to what they need to be to deal with non-infectious, called non-communicable diseases, NCDs. And as bad as COVID-19 has been, people forget that even in 2020, the biggest killer in the world was not COVID, but it was non-communicable diseases. So I think what we need to do is look at the global machinery for dealing with both infectious and non-infectious disease. We've got to look at aid programs, which I believe don't do enough to deal with non-communicable disease. We've got to look at national policies, and we've got to look again at international policies and international machinery. And I just think it's, there's a lot of intellectual work that still needs to be done, but also a lot of political and diplomatic work, both within countries and around the world. And I'm hoping this crisis maybe spurs some of that work to be done. We're doing our part. I should also flag, we've got something called Think Global Health. It's a website at cf.org, which essentially is a venue where we debate what we believe, we bring voices in from all over the country and the world to debate what needs to be done nationally and internationally to deal with not just the immediate challenge of COVID-19, but with infectious disease writ large, but also with NCDs across the board.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Dr. Haass. We tend to forget that 70% of mortality worldwide is due to non-communicable diseases, the leading cause of disability, yet public health gets the runt of the litter, is the runt of the litter in terms of public expenditures, which is tragic and has no alignment to the cost in human lives that are lost or disabled as a result of them. I really hope that we can focus in reforming international development, working more effectively with countries to focus on the systems you described, what the administrative structures that really need to be weakened to be able to have any country to be able to meet the public needs and to distribute the public goods and address the public challenges that their citizens face. Dr. Haass, it's been really a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you very much for all of what you're doing and the team at the Council for Foreign Relations to inform the world, to mend a broken world, to create build bridges, to inform people, and to actually address the multilateral challenges that we need to do together instead of separately. So thank
Well,
you so
Dr.
much.
Martin, well, thank you as well, both for this opportunity today, but also for what you and your consortium, what you all do to promote understanding of global health in this country and around the world. So keep it up, please.
Thank you so much.
Be well.
You too.